Hey, what's up, everyone? Thanks for tuning in to Be On Air. I'm your host, Kaylee Marks. If you're an entrepreneur, coach, author, or have a brand and are trying to grow your business, or even if you just have a message to share, then this show is for you. We are sharing proven blueprints to amplify yourself, and we'll discuss every step of the podcaster's journey to give you the mindset, tools, and community that you need to launch and grow your own impactful podcasting platform so that you can be on air. Before we get into today's episode, if you haven't already, please subscribe. And if you're enjoying the show, please consider sharing this podcast with someone who might benefit from it. Your support helps so much. Thanks for tuning in. Let's get started. Hey, welcome back to another episode of Be On Air. I'm your host, Kaylee Marks, and today we are speaking with Kevin Johnson. Kevin is an incredible human. I've known him for several years now, and I'm really excited to share him with you. He is a leader in the sensory deprivation industry. His institute, Zero Gravity Institute, helps people open up float centers. They have a float center here in Austin, Texas, and he is a pioneer in that space as far as building just the next level of sensory deprivation tanks and consulting for people. He's also an incredible musician, touring artist, has been touring for decades, creating just beautiful music with his partner. And they're up to some really amazing stuff. One thing is their organization, Vida Brillante. They are shamanic guides and facilitators, also known as Ayahuasqueros. They share medicine from the South American rainforests and share healing with the world. So I'm really happy to have Kevin here. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks, Kaylee. This is great. It's really cool to have this opportunity. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Yeah, actually, I think that you may have put like the idea of podcasting in my mind a couple years ago. You had mentioned just being interested in podcasting, and I wasn't even quite interested in it at that point. So this feels very full circle to me, and I'm really excited for our conversation today. And maybe what we could start with is just like a little bit of background information on you and your journey, especially with like music and touring and how you got into sensory deprivation. If you could kind of walk us through your timeline a little bit.
Yeah, so I went to college in New York City at a theater school. It's the American Academy of Dramatic Arts. And I had been playing music and doing theater since I was a little kid. During my time in New York, I was keeping myself alive financially by taking my guitar, going into the subway and busking every day. I'd do a couple hours before school and a couple hours after school, which is primarily the way that I made money. And then I would also do a little bit of work in some small pubs and little bars around New York.
Fast forward some years, you're working there at the Float Center. What happened to music? What happened to acting? And how did it take you to eventually open up your own float center and become so involved in that industry? Because this must have been right around the beginning or when it was still becoming popularized.
Yeah, so this was in, I started working at the Float Center in like 1985, 1986, something like that. About 3 years later, I guess it would have been about 88, I decided to come back to Texas. I grew up in Texas. It was a girl that brought me back to Texas. I had this high school sweetheart, and we were trying to conduct this long distance relationship and was presenting a lot of challenges. So I decided I was going to move back to Texas. I moved up to the Dallas-Fort Worth area primarily because they had a really good theater scene, but they also had a burgeoning music scene. The Deep Ellum music scene really starting to be a force in independent music. And I was looking for a place where it would support both my theater aspirations, but also I was looking for a place that would be open and friendly to new artists that were writing and creating their own original music. I moved to the Dallas-Fort Worth area. I found a band that needed a songwriter, and I started working with that band, and we started gigging around Texas, doing small tours regionally. And that's actually where I met my wife, Carol.
That's incredible. And I mean, so you guys collaborate in everything you do. You collaborated in the music, you collaborated in the float spa, you collaborate in the shamanic work you do, right?
Yeah.
It's incredible to find a partner like that and to go through that journey and to just have found someone who can kind of track with you among all these different, very distinct, connected but distinct areas or fields. So that's such a gift. Thanks for sharing that story. So just to tune in with the listeners right now, part of the reason why I felt like this is so valuable, your story and your experiences, even for people trying to start a podcast, there's so many parallels and there's so much similarity between the music path and the podcasting path. I mean, it takes same amount of discipline, if not even more. It takes so much commitment, and you have to be in it for a long time. And I mean, almost 30 years touring with sound gear, with musicians, with payments, with, just the management of the tour. It's quite an undertaking. And you mentioned having the validation of these larger artists. And I think that's one of the keys that podcasters are using to grow their audience is you interview guests that either have a show that's a little bit above or bigger than yours, and you invite guests onto your show, you go on to other shows, and that in a sense validates your show. It also helps you to, borrow their audience. And in the end, it also just gives you these relationships and connections that are so valuable. So you must have, that must have been a really just powerful experience to be around all these, cute, like Jeff Buckley. I mean, that's just incredible to tour with him. What happened to sensory deprivation and the float tank stuff while all this was happening? Did that kind of pause, or when did you open your own spa and start building tanks?
Sadly, the floating industry, with only a few exceptions, the floating industry did not survive the AIDS crisis. So remember, in the late 80s, I know probably a lot of your listeners aren't even old enough to really remember what that time was like. When AIDS, HIV first started just decimating the world, nobody understood how it was transmitted. And at that time, the alarm bells were going off. People were not even touching doorknobs or drinking out of public water fountains. It was really, no one understood how it was being transmitted. And so the idea of getting into public water was outrageous. I mean, public swimming pools closed down. There was just no way for the floating industry to survive that. And so the few float centers that were opening commercially in the mid to late 80s, they pretty much all closed down. Space-Time Tanks in Chicago is one of the only float centers that actually stayed alive and is still in existence today, as well as Samadhi Float Company in California, the float tank manufacturer. They had their own float center as well. So there may have been a few others scattered around the world, Europe and Asia, that survived it, but not very many. It was very, very, very hard to find a flotation tank through that whole time. I missed it a lot. And I felt like the world was missing it. And then around 2012, maybe, Joe Rogan talking about float tanks on his podcast. And he has a float tank in his house. He was talking about it a lot, which was one of the main reasons that I started listening to his podcast, right? And then I started noticing, like, oh, people are getting interested in floating again. Float centers are open, where there's one in Portland, there's one in Los Angeles, there's one in New York City, there's one in Chicago. Like, they started popping up again, And at that time, Carol and I started looking at it, realizing, like, hey, I know a lot about floating, and perhaps this is something that we want to offer the community in Austin. And we saw this as a twofold opportunity. On one level, just floating, and floating is great. And then we would have access to float tanks whenever we wanted. And we felt like the community in Austin would embrace this idea. There's so many artists, and floating is so good for creativity. And we thought it would be a nice thing to offer the community. On the other side of things, as musicians, as performing artists, we realized that we were always asking for support from the communities where we played music. Come to our shows, buy tickets, pay a cover charge, buy our CDs, buy our t-shirts, support us, support us, support us, support the club, support, right? It's like we were always asking for something from the community in order to support what we were doing. The idea of opening a flotation center was a way for us to give something to the community, that we would offer this as just something beneficial.
I love that point about just always asking versus what can we give. So it sounds like there's a shift that happened there.
Yeah. 12, we started making plans for the float center, and then we opened it in the summer of 2013.
So you opened the sensory deprivation, the float spa. So did the music stop, or was that a concurrent thing that you opened the spa and you were doing that and you would still go out on tour?
So we stopped touring at the level that we were touring at before. So before that, we were touring a lot. For many years, we averaged 250, 275 days a year on tour. After that many years of touring, it's just a hard thing to sustain. It's a lot of work, it's a lot of energy. Things were evolving for us personally anyway. And our spiritual practices, our daily practices were becoming more important. It was an opportunity for us to take a look at what the rest of our lives would look like. And we felt like, we've had this great career. We can do something else. Let's try something new. Like we don't have to just do this till we die. Over time, that internal need to create music, it changed too. Carol is an incredible holographic sound healer. And so a lot of her creativity and her energy around music started to focus more on her sound healing. And then for both of us, the music of ayahuasca, the Icaros, the medicine music, right? Medicina musica. It filled that need where we could take our musical talents and use them in a different way.
Yeah, so I love seeing this journey and this transformation, and how our initial passions and interests can evolve over a lifetime based on, our communities and just our experience. And one of I think the characteristics of what you're doing is you're facilitating an experience, and that's something that podcast hosts have to do. Is we have to facilitate this container for this conversation and for the podcast episode for our audience. And so you had experience doing that, obviously, as an actor, right? But you have experience doing that as a touring musician. You have to really have a presence on stage and command attention and guide people through a journey. But then that transferred over into the floating industry. And I know you were on some pretty large stages, and you're a leader in that industry. So you've given you've done a lot of public speaking, and then now doing the medicine music and the guiding through these shamanic practices, you're having to even deepen that more, I would imagine, with that facilitation. So could you talk a little bit about, and especially with podcasters in mind, like what does it take to hold someone's experience or hold many people's experience? And what are some like facilitation tips or just meditations you've had?
It's really interesting, Kaylee. As I've grown into my shamanic work, it has become very clear to me that shamanism is a birthright. Everyone can be a shamanic practitioner. When I looked back at my life, I realized that playing music for audiences was an a shamanic act. We were creating an environment and facilitating people as they entered an altered state of consciousness, changed their state of consciousness
Totally.
during the course of our performance, right? And we were responsible for creating and holding that space for a given amount of time. Then we went into the flotation world, where we once again create an environment and facilitate people as they enter an altered state of consciousness, a place where they can do deep transformative work, right? And we held that space for them for a certain amount of time. And the same thing now as we do our work with ayahuasca and presenting this beautiful medicine and representing the powerful, beautiful, benevolent spirit that lies behind the medicine, we're doing the exact same thing. And so for podcasters, you're doing the same thing. You're altering people's consciousness with the conversation that you're having. How do you want them to feel? What do you want them to learn? Right? You're literally doing the exact same thing. And so whether or not an individual podcaster considers themselves a shamanic practitioner, in a very real way, they're doing a type of shamanic work. I believe podcasting is a powerful, powerful medium, and it is changing the world. Just be in touch with that. Like, let spirit guide what you do. Let spirit guide your conversations. Let your desire to help people. I don't think podcasters would be podcasting unless they wanted to help people. They want to help people by exposing them to information, introducing them to people, opening their minds to new ideas and new processes and new ways of thinking, new ways of being, right? It can be profound and powerful, whether you're talking about health and wellness or spirituality or music and arts or cooking or whatever it is that your podcast may be about. If you hold in your mind and in your heart that at the root of what you're doing is trying to help people, trying to expand people, their knowledge, their information base, all of that. I think that's where you're going to find the most personally. And it's when you find the personal reward that everything else falls into place. That's when you'll have listeners. That's when you'll have subscribers. That's when you'll be an interesting guest on other people's podcasts.
I love that. That is really well said and so true. And it made me think maybe not everyone is listening is 100% tuned into the ayahuasca world or the plant medicine world. Maybe even some people don't agree with it, and that's fine. There is something very interesting happening though with it, and how many people it's transforming for the better. And it's almost as if it's broadcasting itself. And I'm curious if you have any thoughts on that, on this medicine and on this medicine music, and how it's starting to spread across the world. And just like, yeah, what do you think about that?
I think it's a beautiful thing. I think at this moment in time is really important for people to understand. There's been a conversation lately around cultural appropriation. There's a lot of what we call gringo shamans, right? People that have studied the medicine and are now facilitating ceremonies around the world. In a major city, it's possible to find an ayahuasca circle. This was done on purpose. Is not an accident. This is not a bunch of gringos appropriating an indigenous culture from South America. In the early part of the 2000s, the Amazon forest came under attack from industry and development. Thousands of acres of forest were being destroyed every single day in order to have commercial farming, commercial logging. The lungs of the earth were being destroyed. Depository of knowledge was being destroyed. Medicine was being destroyed. Species were being destroyed. The indigenous healers in the Amazon looked at what was happening. They saw the sickness of the world. And they realized in that moment that the only way to save their world, Amazonia, the only way to save it was to send their medicine out into the world and heal the sickness of the world so that they would reconnect to the spirit of Pachamama, the earth, and protect her and heal her. They determined that the best way to do that was to give the world their medicine. And so they made a conscious decision to start training people to serve this medicine. And they willingly started taking students in, teaching them, and then sending them out into the world. Ayahuasca is a vine, and vines spread. And what we're experiencing right now is ayahuasca spreading around the globe, spreading and embracing the world is what's happening. We see it healing people one individual at a time. And that is having an effect on the world. And so we will continue to serve as long as Mother Ayahuasca wants us to serve. We will continue to serve.
And now it's in this abstract dimension of the broadcast waves. There's how many countless people, Joe Rogan, as an example, loves to talk about DMT or other kinds of psychedelics. How many podcasts are out there about plant medicine? MAPS is doing incredible work with it. So these medicines are now even beyond spreading the medicine themselves. They're spreading the teachings through us, through the airwaves. And I find that just so fascinating that it's almost transcended the physical substance. And now it's expanding consciousness just through information, just through airwaves.
That is such a good point, Kaylee. A thing that we say around ayahuasca is that ayahuasca is for everyone, but not everyone needs to drink ayahuasca. And the reason that we say this is because when you drink the medicine, when Carol drinks the medicine, we have this powerful ally now in this benevolent spirit of nature. We can now share our medicine with other people, right? Just like we're doing right now, we're sharing our medicine to our listeners. And this is, again, for all of the podcasters, like this is a way to hold this in your mind and your heart and your intentions, is to think about it as you're sharing your medicine, your personal medicine with the world. You're sharing your guests' personal medicine with the world in whatever form that takes. It doesn't have to be ayahuasca. It doesn't even have to be other plant medicines or psychedelics. Yes, it's a beautiful thing that psychedelics are entering the mainstream. We're having better, more serious conversations about psychedelics now than at any other time in history. And that's a beautiful thing. But there are many kinds of medicine.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's an unprecedented time. I mean, it really is. And it's not because of COVID. It's because of the amount of wisdom that is out there and the amount of healing that is available for those to take. And it's being spread at all times. And it can be difficult to discern and know what to tune into and what not to tune into. And I think having lineages and having groups, having organizations who are kind of containing the responsibility to check out the source of the information that's coming through. And I know that you are connected with different traditions and lines, but also in the sensory deprivation world. Like this is a line of thought that has been developed over time and is coming to us now, however its current evolution is. So I'm curious, like, what do you see the future of floating? Like, do you see what's going on with that? Where do you see that going? If listeners are interested in trying it, what would you recommend to them? And then, of course, as sort of an on-ramp to medicine, how could people start to tune into different kinds of plant medicine? Or even if they don't want to take something, how could they tune into what, the Icaros or the music that accompanies ceremonies like that?
This has always been a powerful component of floating. This is one of the things that is really attractive about it. Like I said, not everyone should be doing psychedelics. Not everyone can. So your job may prohibit it. Your family life may prohibit it. I have a lot of friends who have children, and they feel like it would be irresponsible of them to leave their children and go off to do a medicine retreat and not be 100% accessible and available should their children need them. And that's beautiful. I mean, I think that's perfectly fine, right? There are many people who have many reasons for not investigating psychedelics and plant medicines. The flotation tank is 1% natural, right? You don't have to ingest a compound to experience an altered state of consciousness. In fact, my argument there would be it is powerful to understand that you can enter deep states of consciousness where profoundly transformative work can be done. Part of being a human is we have the ability to access these states of consciousness. When we are being bombarded and overwhelmed by just the overwhelming amount of sensory input that's available to us at any given moment. So I a couple of years ago that said at any given moment, there are 400 million bits of information available to the human brain. This number seems outrageous, 400 million bits. But just everyone, take a snapshot of what's going on around you, right? What color is your shirt? What color is the rug under your feet? The walls? Where's the light coming from? Where are the shadows being cast? What is that sound in the background? Somebody's mowing their lawn outside. I can hear the music playing in the background. Kaylee's jamming on a guitar in the other room, right? Like temperature, sound, gravity. The impact that gravity is having on us all the time. When you get into a flotation tank, we do so much heavy lifting just by getting you in there. 90% of the workload is taken off of your brain and your central nervous system. Now you have these resources that used to be occupied by processing all this incoming information. Well, now that we've freed up those resources, they can be allocated to doing background work that we don't ordinarily get to do. All of this sensory input that we're used to getting on a regular basis is leaving a residue on the lens through which we see the world and how we see ourselves and how we see our place in that world.
I have never considered it quite like that. The way you framed that just made it so clear, the benefit of undergoing that process. It makes me want to drive over to your float spot right now and jump in a tank. That just sounds absolutely like vital, especially right now. There's so much going on. People are cooped up together who don't usually spend that much time. Families are going through so much stress with COVID. Some people are worried they're going to die just by taking a breath outside their door without their mask on. There's just so much stress. And I know that especially your tanks, you guys have just the most incredible filtration system. And I know this because I had the privilege of getting to actually see your manufacturing lab and get to work with my brother on some of the systems and just see what's under the hood. And it's incredible. And it's very safe. And I just cannot recommend it enough to give it a try. I mean, it's not scary and you have complete control over how dark it is. If you want the door open, like you're not stuffed into a tank and you just have to sit there for an hour. The person going in is under control, but the amount of relief that my body has felt in there is extraordinary. And the way that you frame that just makes so much sense.
Yeah. For people that are nervous about the process, keep in mind that the most efficacious experience from it is when you are in complete sensory deprivation. So no light, no sound, no temperature, no gravity. If that's intimidating for you, then we don't have to do it that way when you first get started. You can leave the door open a little bit. You can leave the lights on. There's a light in there. There's speakers in there. You could have music playing. Right. So we can slowly and incrementally work toward the pure sensory deprivation environment. We don't have to jump in there all the way. Also, people should keep in mind, if you feel like you might be claustrophobic, there are float tanks out there like mine, and there are others out there that are huge. Right. So our tanks are 6 feet wide, 8 feet long, and 7 feet tall. They're bigger than your bathroom at home. So if you're okay going in the bathroom at home, you're going to be fine in one of these tanks. Take little baby steps, and every once in a while turn around and look how fun, and appreciate yourself for getting on the path in the first place. Appreciate yourself, show yourself some gratitude for taking those little steps. They all add up and they all make a difference.
Oof, that is some wisdom right there. That is, I think it's actually backed by science, habit formation. If anyone's read Atomic Habits by James Clear, like those baby steps really add up in extraordinary ways and in sustainable ways. And so that's really fantastic advice. I mean, I'm so inspired by your message, Kevin, and what you shared with us. And as we're getting down to the end of the episode, how could our listeners tune in to more of what you're sharing, your music, your medicine work, the float spa here in Austin? Where, how can people find out more about what you do?
So zerogravityinstitute.com is the website for the Float Center. There's a lot of information there about what we do, about floating in general. There's a lot of scientific research that's available through the website. If somebody wants to contact me directly, Kevin at zerogravityinstitute.com. If people are looking for information about doing medicine work, they can contact me at that address as well. The Vita Brillante website is under construction right now. For legal reasons, it's not going to be a place to really connect to ayahuasca for right now. While we can't leave the country, we used to do a lot of retreats in Guatemala. We're, like everybody else, just now trying to figure out what that looks like. But if people are interested in more information about medicine work and some recommendations on where to find places to do work, they can contact me at that email, Kevin at Zero Gravity Institute, and I'm happy to pick up a conversation with them about it.
Awesome. Thank you. Yeah. And Kevin's really just a wonderful person and so helpful with sharing information and pointing people in the right direction. We've had so many wonderful conversations and they've always been so fascinating. Yeah. Wow. Well, I mean, that was a beautiful ride and I'm so grateful for your time and everything you shared. And I really feel that you're broadcasting some epic messages. So thank you again for showing up on the podcast. And I encourage everyone to check out your work.
Well, thanks for having me, Kaylee. I'm really inspired by you and what you do. I've always loved your music. I'm really thrilled to see you on this new adventure of your podcast and helping other people get the podcast together. I think it's really great. And I really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you today. And I was wondering if, as we go out here, if maybe we want to go out with a little medicine music. Perhaps I could offer your listeners an Icaro.
That would be incredible. In fact, let me go ahead and put the video on speaker view here so they can see you more clearly. All right, that would be a beautiful gift. Ready when you are.
In medicine work with ayahuasca, we do a lot of work with different spirits of nature. We're particularly tree centric. We do a lot of work with tree spirits. This Icaro is for Ayauma. Ayauma is symbolized by a headless giant. The reason that he is headless is because his head is in his chest. His mind is near his heart. And so this is the Icaro for calling the spirit of Ayauma. Yonna yonna ni Ayauma sitoini. Yonna yonna ni Ayauma sitoini. Altoi montai troncoi sito, puntai montai cogo cito, forsi tongi ola roso, rija reva bea pura pura medicina, claro despeado mundo enterito, rija reva bea pura pura medicina, limpia cuerpoicito, limpia shongo ni setoini, limpia sentirito, limpia shongo nito. Poderosa medicina, poderoso Icaroine, poderosa medicina, poderoso Icaroine, volando la monge todo malo visione todo cruzamiento se un agua tierra subterráneo aire kunaini nunca pudiendo dominarse toini ningún espíritu malo kunaini todo rebota prote pura medicina ne resbelonge chini todo malo kunaini hare runde nai hare runde nai cubre cuerpocito pura medicina ne cuida monge sin ningunas aflicciones halarimo pura medicina ne halarimo pura medicina llamo ne gigante sin cabeza ne llamo ne gigante sin cabeza ne legítimo doctorcito poderoso Icaro legítimo maestrocito poderoso Icaro fresco Icaro santo cunayare cuerpocito cunayare sin ningunas aflicciones halarimo pura luz atini halarimo pura medicina hare runde nai hare runde nai.
Awesome. I'm speechless, obviously. That was really powerful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us all.
Thank you. It was my pleasure.
Till next time.
Haribol.
Haribol. All right, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in to this episode of Beyond Air. I hope you enjoyed it and are now one step closer to turning on your microphone and broadcasting your message to the world. I'd love to hear from you. Let me know how I can help you on your broadcasting journey by getting in touch with me and maybe even apply for a strategy session if you want to discuss your podcast idea. You can reach me at www.podcast-farm.com. Till next time, my friends, I'm Kaylee Marks, and thanks for tuning in to Be On Air.